everybody. I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Henry David Thoreau said, "The question is not what you look at, but what you see." And Voltaire is attributed to the quote, "Uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one." Well, on today's episode, we're going to explore the topic of mindfulness, the art of becoming more mindful, unlocking the potential of mind-body unity, why predictability is an illusion, decision-making, and more. My guest is known worldwide as the mother of mindfulness and the mother of positive psychology. She's a professor of psychology at Harvard University, where she was the first woman at Harvard to be tenured in psychology. She's authored more than 200 research articles and is the best-selling author of 13 books, including Mindfulness, The Art of Noticing, Counterclockwise, and her latest book, The Mindful Body. Among other numerous awards and honors, she's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship. Her trailblazing experiments in social psychology have earned her an inclusion in the New York Times Magazine's Year in Ideas issue. She's also a gallery exhibiting painter. Please welcome the woman who's helping all of us learn to think our way to chronic health, Dr. Ellen Langer. Ellen, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Jay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I am very much looking forward to our conversation. Your body of work, not only being just incredibly massive in volume, but it is so interesting, the studies that you've done. And I really have enjoyed reading your most recent book and learning more about you. So let's dive into the conversation. I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to maybe share 3 or 4 words that you would use to describe yourself. 3 or 4 descriptive words.
Confident but uncertain.
Confident but uncertain. Okay.
Happy. There are many other words, but let's just stick with those 3.
Okay. All right. All right. Very good. So confident but uncertain and happy. So let's wind the clock back here a bit. You start off your most recent book with a story about your mother. I would love it if we could go back even further a bit and talk about, give us an example, like using confident but uncertain. Is that something that's always been part of who you are? Is that words that you would have used to describe yourself early in life?
No, I don't think so. I think I was more or less confident throughout my life. But the uncertainty resulted from an experience I had many years ago. I've told this countless times, but I'll tell it again. I'm at this horse event, and this man asked me if I could watch his horse for him because he wanted to get his horse a hot dog. Well, I'm an A++ student, the kind everybody in the class didn't like, whatever. And no one knew better, as well, but not better than I, that horses don't eat meat. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And it was at that moment that I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. And then I spent a lot of time thinking about it and realized that science, the place from which we get most of our facts, only give us probabilities, not absolutes. But it's so hard to teach these probabilities. If you wanted to say these horses that were this much hungry, this weight on this occasion were mostly unlikely to eat the meat, it's a mouthful, so it's abbreviated. Horses don't eat meat. But some of them do. And possibly all of them do some of the time. We don't know. And, now uncertainty is something that scares most people, but it won't scare once you recognize that nobody knows, everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspectives, and certainty breeds mindlessness. We keep trying to know things, to hold things still so we can have some control over them. And in doing so, we're confusing the stability of our mindsets with the stability of the underlying phenomenon. Hold it still in your head if you want to, but it is changing. So often, Jay, when I'm doing these podcasts or lecturing, I might ask people the one thing they're most certain of, which is how much is 1 + 1? Now, most people say 2, right?
Sure.
But 1 + 1 isn't always 2. If you add one pile of laundry plus one pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum plus 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 + 1 is 1. You add one cloud plus one, and so on. In the real world, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, as more often as it does. And although people are not that educated in math, 1 + 1 is 2 if you're using a base 10 number system. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 + 1 is written as 10. Okay, so who cares? Well, the reason to care is that now, let's say somebody approaches you and says, Jay, how much is 1 + 1? All of a sudden you have choice. When you're mindless, you had no choice. The answer was 2. Now you see you could say 1, 2, 10, and perhaps somebody will come up with some other answer as well. Right? So we can do everything either mindlessly or mindfully, and that means we can do it imperfectly mindfully or perfectly mindlessly. Once you've got it, completely, you know it, you're no longer there. You don't need to be. So an example I use is, let's say you're a kid and you're in the elevator and your mother picks you up so you can press the button because you just can't reach it. And next time you're in the elevator, you try, and you're a little taller, but you still can't reach it. Then the point finally comes, you can press that button. When was the last time you were excited pressing a button in an elevator? All right. So when we reach that perfection, we're no longer there. And something else I think that people need to understand, if I ask them, can robots be happy? Everybody would say no. And when we're mindless, we're no different from robots. So, 40, 50 years of research has shown me that no matter what you're doing, you can do it mindfully or mindlessly, and the consequences of doing it mindfully are enormous. We have many studies where people live longer. When you're mindful, the neurons are firing, and it's literally, as I just said, and figuratively enlivening. It's what you're doing when you're happy. It's what you're doing when you're engaged, right? And when I talk about mindfulness, I'm not talking about meditation, which is fine. That's just something different. Here, it's simply noticing. But the sad thing is, since we think we know, most of the time, we're not noticing anything. We're not there. Now, when you're not there to know you're not there. But I'm here now to tell you, virtually all of us are not there most of the time, which is sad. And being there is very easy. You can become more mindful top down or bottom up. What I mean by that, once you embrace uncertainty and you don't know, nobody knows for sure, you can't know, then you naturally tune in, right? Bottom up is just start actively noticing things about the things you think you know. Person you might live with, a friend, something at work. And all of a sudden you'll see, gee, you didn't know it as well as you thought you did. Right? And then your attention naturally goes to it. And you do that often enough, you come to realize uncertainty is the rule. And then you get to exploit the power in uncertainty, which is enormous. In fact, let me add,
Sure.
that I believe that virtually, and I say virtually just because I'm an academic, but just between the two of us and the other 10 million people I've said this to, I really mean all of our problems, whether personal, impersonal, interpersonal, professional, global, are the direct or indirect effect of our mindlessness. So we change that, we have the potential to set up a whole new way of living for both ourselves and everybody around us.
All right. So you've given us
A lot.
a wealth of information there already. So when did this idea of mindlessness versus mindfulness first come into your consciousness, and when it really became something that was of interest to you enough that you wanted to make it part of your life's work?
Yeah, it's hard to know. The answer I've been given when asked that question is that I experienced myself in a store bumping into a mannequin and excusing myself. And then I said, what am I doing? And I do that all the time when I'm on the phone with machines. It's nice to be polite, but the machine doesn't really care. Then I was moving up from New York City to Cambridge, and my stereotype of Cambridge was everybody there was Harvard related. It was just everybody was very smart. And when I got there, I saw they weren't so smart. And then I realized it wasn't a lack of IQ. There was something else going on. So, for example, because in New York, many people, at least the people I knew, were street smart, as it's called. In Cambridge, this way back when, the banks would close at 3 o'clock, which meant there was all this parking. Well, if that were in New York, at 3:01, all the spaces would be taken. But in Cambridge, no. Another bank story, I'd go in New York, everybody's moving around to get on the shortest line. In Cambridge, there'd be one line with 10 people, another line with 2 people. I just think there was something different going on. And then being on the faculty at Harvard, a lot of very smart, clever, innovative people. There were things that were said and done that seemed to me to defy some of that smarts. I'm not going to give you examples, so don't ask for it. So that was part of it. I think that much of what the book is about, The Mindful Body, is the influence we have over our health and well-being. And that work started a long time ago. A theory was starting to be born before I realized it, which was the book, by the way, started as a memoir, so there are lots of personal stories in it. This one story is kind of fun. I got married when I was obscenely young, and we went to Paris on a honeymoon, and we're in this restaurant, and I order a mixed grill. One of the items on the grill was pancreas. I had my then husband point out which is the pancreas, and I'm not sure why, Jay, but I felt now that I was a married woman, all grown up, it was incumbent upon me to eat the pancreas. So I ate everything. Big eater. Now comes a moment of truth. Can I eat the pancreas? I start eating it, and I literally get sick. At which point, he starts laughing. For newlyweds, that was not a good thing. I said, why are you laughing? He said, because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a long time ago. All right, so somehow I made myself sick. The other story that's related to this is my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and the cancer had metastasized to her pancreas. That's the end game. Right, to make a long story short, the medical world wrote her off and didn't give her any exercise, her limbs or anything, because after all, she had a very short time. They expected her to stay alive. And then magically it was gone. So here, I made myself well. I made myself sick. She made herself well. And that was the beginning, although, of course, I didn't know it, of my mind-body unity theory. I'll wait.
That is so interesting. I want to
There's
pull
a lot
on
in
a couple of
Okay, sure.
yeah, I want to pull on a couple threads there, but I want to go back to something that you said because I think this is very interesting. You mentioned that you were married very young. In researching you and listening to some other shows that you've been on, I had heard you mention, and please push back on me if I'm wrong, but I heard you mention that you actually were married at 16, but kept that quiet.
Yeah, and then got married again to the same person at 19, which was how old I was when but I didn't want people to know that. I want there to be lots of surprises when you actually read the book. So don't tell me about the Hell's Angels story or my interactions with a couple of psychopaths and what have you.
I won't do that because we obviously want everyone to go out and buy a copy of the book. But there are so many great stories, and I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned that this is, really part memoir, because you do tell some great personal stories, great analogies. But really, what this is, it is a book about changing our thoughts and realizing that the way that we think impacts the way that we feel. But and
Yeah,
you
but
talked about.
I tell you, Jay, so many people have said things like that that I think the audience really doesn't grasp just how much control I'm talking about. It goes far beyond, I think, what most people presume. I'll give you an example. I ask my students, how far is it humanly possible to run? Now, these are Harvard kids, so they know a marathon is 26 miles, so they know it has to be more than that, or I wouldn't ask the question. And the next person says 30 and 30, and it goes on until someone says 50, and then everybody groans. Then I turn on a YouTube of the Tarahumara, which is a tribe in Copper Canyon, Mexico, who can easily run 200 miles without stopping. And what I'm suggesting is all those things that we know, where we think, well, maybe 50 is humanly possible, but most of us, I've never run 5 miles, so it all seems very far away from me. The difference between what we think we can do and what in fact we can do is enormous, represented by the difference, let's say, between 50 and 200, and there's no reason to think 200 is the upper limit.
Well, I want to talk about a study that you did, a very well-known study. I remember I first came across the counterclockwise study on, I believe it was an NPR episode that goes back several years ago. And when I heard about the study, number one, it was absolutely fascinating, but I think it speaks to the power of what can happen when we are thinking differently and how it impacts not only the way we feel, right, but it actually impacts our health and our well-being and other attributes. So give us a
Well, let me tell
synopsis, if
you,
you will.
sure. Before
Please.
I do that, let me tell you the theory briefly behind that, okay?
Okay.
So, a long time ago, people just spoke about mind and body as if they were two separate things. I have been arguing for mind-body unity, to see the mind and the body as a single unit for decades now. Now, the world has come closer, and they talk about mind-body connection. It's not connected, because if they're connected, you have the same problem. How are they connected? How do you get from a thought to the body? All right, I say they're just words. Once we put the two back together, wherever we put the mind, we're necessarily putting the body. So there are a host of studies, the first of which was this counterclockwise study, where we put people's minds in a place, took the measurements from their body. This was a study where we retrofitted a retreat to seem to be 20 years earlier. And we had elderly men. These were men, at the time they were around 80, but this study was done in 1979. So that was when 80 was 80, which would be more like 100 now. All right, so they were really old. And what they were going to do was live in the retreat for a week as if they were their younger selves. So they were going to talk about past events as if they were just unfolding. Everything was to bring their minds back in time. As a result, in this very short period, without any medical intervention, their hearing improved, their vision improved, their strength, their memory, and they looked noticeably younger. And they didn't look 20 years younger, but still, the data said they looked, they seemed to be younger. So that was the first in what has become, well, I have many, many studies that are reported in the Mindful Body, all making the same point, all shouting, we have so much control, it's time to start to harness it. The most recent, let me tell you, is one I did with my graduate student, Peter Rungel. We inflict a wound, a minor wound, and we have people individually in front of a clock. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, it's going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, half as fast. And for a third of the people, it's real time. The wound heals based on perceived time. That means clock time. Right. The same thing with blood sugar level. And we have so many of these studies that it's very exciting. And it all goes back to what I was saying initially about science only gives us probabilities. What I mean by that is any fact you're using is sort of true, sometimes true, maybe true, that doesn't mean it's definitely true. So if the doctor says whatever, you broke your leg, I don't know how long it take, but let's say he says or she says it's going to take 3 months to heal. It doesn't mean it's going to take 3 months to heal. People are very different one from the next. But if you expect it to take 3 months to heal, it's probably going to take 3 months to heal. Our expectations determine far more than we realize, and the things that control our mindfulness or mindlessness control our expectations. So the more mindful you are, the looser in some sense your expectations are, the more your experience can benefit. There is a study that colleagues of mine did. The gorilla study? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the video. Yes,
Yeah, so
amazing.
people are watching a basketball game, and in the middle of the game, somebody dressed in a gorilla uniform gets on the court, and people don't see it. And, they don't see it. No, you see what you expect. So what I'm trying to do is to get people to change their expectations so they can see more, hear more, experience more.
I love that, and that's a great example of why we need to change those expectations. Now, you talk about predictability as an illusion,
Yeah.
and so I want to explore that a little more deeply. But I also want to ask you, as we're talking about that, in your experience, what is the most challenging aspect of helping people come to the realization that it's to their benefit to be more mindful as opposed to living life
Yeah.
mindlessly, which many of us do?
Yeah, well, the older you are, probably the more mindlessness you've experienced. And when you're mindless, you're not there. So it's hard for me to get people, if they're not there, to ask themselves, do they want to be there? So it really, it's a challenge. And there are a few ways of dealing with it. One is just if people embrace this uncertainty and introduce it to everything. And schools, we're taught most of this mindlessness in schools, where teachers ask for single answers, and we're rated in a way where some of us are great, some of us are medium, some of us are awful, without respect to who chose the criteria. Lots of things we sort of buy into our place in this world. And so if you've lived your life feeling mediocre for a very long time, you're going to need perhaps some giant success to say, well, maybe all of that's nonsense. So I want to start smaller and just get people to recognize a simple thing. It sounds like a Hallmark card. No disrespect to Hallmark, but all we have are moments. And if you make the moment matter, then you're living a life that matters. And people become, the best way for me to influence people is when they're unhappy, because I can teach people a different way of understanding stress. And stress follows from a belief that something's going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be dreadful. And as you said, what I've said, we can't predict. So if you instead said to yourself, what are 3 reasons this thing won't happen? You're going to start to feel better. But then let's assume it does happen. How is that actually a good thing? Because people don't realize evaluations are in our heads, not in events. What we do now is we frame things. This is terrible, so then we have to run away from it. This is wonderful. We have to step over people to get it, without realizing that the thing itself is neither good, bad, or indifferent. And I think it's hard for people to accept that in sort of a global way. If we go back to the stress, and you simply said to yourself, think of the last 3 times you were stressed. Did the thing you worried about ever happen? And most of the time, it doesn't happen. And then, even if it did happen, for us to be talking about it now with you means you got through it in some way. And, so it's sort of no worry before it's time. But the one-liner that my friends seem to find most useful is ask yourself next time you're stressed, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? It's almost never a tragedy. That doesn't mean tragedies don't happen or are experienced that way, but for most of us, I missed the deadline, I banged the car, I burnt the roast. Who cares? And as you get older, you realize most of those things. I remember when I was young, if I had spilled something on my shirt, I'd walk around like this, like an idiot. So no one would know, without realizing walking around like this looks pretty stupid also. So they wouldn't see it. Now, then you get older, but you can be older, younger. I try to teach my, undergraduates, no reason to wait to get this wisdom, that who cares? That people who know you know that you don't typically have whatever you spilled on your shirt. And people who don't know you don't know you. So what's the difference? And I do this exercise with them. I tell them they can't come to class next week unless they're wearing two different shoes. Now, the bold ones might wear a black sneaker and a white sneaker. The ones who are scared, if they do it at all, come with two shoes where you have to look really hard to see that, in fact, they're different. But then we discussed it, and nobody even looked at them. And if they did, so what? If you stand tall because you're confident and uncertain, means people will assume that there's some good reason for it.
That is so interesting. So the couple of things that you said there that kind of brought something up in my mind. Number one, when you mentioned about making moments matter. So my father passed away at the end of July, and when I was at the funeral and I was saying a few words about him, I ended with a well-known quote by Abraham Lincoln that I'll probably butcher a bit here, but it's not the years in your life that matter most. It's the life in your years, which is basically what you said as well. So, I think about that.
You'll have to send me that quote from Lincoln because I have been saying this for many years, and now if I should have quoted him, I've just been taken to task. I need to change that.
I
But
will definitely send that to you. But it's a great reminder of being in the moment, right?
right, but you
And
see, the
when
thing that people need to understand is that if you add more life to your years, you're likely to live longer. So you accomplish both ends.
Oh,
Um,
that's good. Yeah, that's so good. And then the other big point that I want to make sure that everyone that's watching and listening right now is paying attention to is it really is about the meaning that we attach to events that happen in our lives, right? The event itself is, I think, to use, well, I'll paraphrase a little bit, right? But the event itself doesn't have the meaning attached to it automatically. It's what we give it, right? And that meaning can have our our biases, the way that we were raised, upbringing, all of those things tied
well,
into
I
it.
think the larger point, Jay, is that the more mindful you are, the more potential meanings you have for every event. When you recognize that good and bad is in your head, not in events, you can just sort of sit back. Right now, people chase the good, run from the bad. An example I used on one of these podcasts when I was saying something like this was that, okay, if the internet goes out, now my internet goes out, I'll go and eat lunch. All right. So what, right? Then the funniest thing happened is the internet went out, and I did in fact go eat lunch. But once you realize that your emotions are a function of your thoughts. Um, People don't make you angry. You take what they say in such a way that you end up getting angry. Um, when you're more mindful, you can choose the emotions you want to experience. Right? To experience an emotion, you have to have some event that seems good, bad, and different. But it itself is nothing. So, how is that actually a great advantage to you?
That's so good. So I want to talk about decision making because you talk about this quite a bit in your book.
Let me interrupt you. So, let me give people the bottom line first.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what decision you make. Don't worry about making the right decision. Make the decision right. All right. Now, to unpack that is going to take a little bit. So people have to sit up and pay attention or still watch the road if you're driving. But you had said that prediction is an illusion. And what
Yes.
people, because prediction is essential for decision making, right? Even if you're deciding, should I have blueberry or apple pie? The only way you can make that decision, if you predict the blueberry is going to taste the way it did the last time you had it, the apple is going to taste the way it, and your body is not the same. 98% of our cells are different at the end of a year. So in some ways, you're not even the you who was the one who tasted the pie, for example.
Sure.
Now, for people to understand that prediction is an illusion, what they have to understand is it's predicting the individual case, predicting a group. So if you were going to start cars, let's say in a Mercedes dealership, sure, most of them are going to start, but might not be the case that each and every one, no matter how good the car is, on occasion there's a lemon, right? Or a car that needs some doodling, whatever. And so we can predict the group, but if you and I, we're not say I'm going to play have a foul shooting contest against Michael Jordan. All right, so if we were shooting 10 baskets, sure, he's likely to win. One basket, he sometimes misses. Let's say he had a fight with his wife, hurt his shoulder, didn't sleep well. Or he says, wouldn't it be fun to let this older woman win? Many reasons where that one shot, I can beat him. All right. We can't predict the individual case. And when you're making decisions for yourself, all you're really trying to do is predict the individual case. When you're told that most people, even if you're told 98% of the people who try this like it, or 98% of the operations, this kind of operation are successful, you don't know if you're going to be part of the 2% or part of the 98%. All right. And prediction is also problematic because when you're predicting, you're looking through a lens, expecting, trying to see whether that thing is there or not there. And in the process, you miss everything else, as you miss the gorilla on the court. All right. So now you're going to make a decision. You've got to predict. Well, let's make the, okay. When you make a decision, you make the decision to take action. That's why you make a decision. As soon as you take the action, you can no longer evaluate the sense of the decision, right? Because you're no longer the same. Should I go to Harvard or Yale? All right, so you go to Yale for the first semester, and let's say you're unhappy. Second semester freshman is not the same as a first semester freshman. You can never experience that original event. You can't compare on the success of your decision. Now, people often experience post-decision regret, and it's mindless. They're saying to themselves, this other alternative would have been better. Could have been better, could have been worse, could have been the same. There's no way of knowing. But more than that, it is nothing. Make it work. So randomly choose and then make your the option a success. Now, decision theorists often say you should do some kind of cost-benefit analysis. But to me, that it's mindless. Why? Because every cost is potentially a benefit. Every benefit is potentially a cost. You add them up, they're not going to tell you what to do. Right? They tell you gather information, but there's no natural endpoint to the information you could gather. And that next piece of information could change, the whole, so you're trying to decide, should you buy the house? And you can, gather information about schools and the lighting and the ceilings and the prices, a massive amount of information. So you decide you're going to buy the house. And then you find out there's a throughway that's coming right up the street. It's going to be built up the street, which of course then you'd probably say, no, maybe I won't buy the house. So I think that this is more complicated than many of the things I talk about in the book. But I think it's worth, reading it and understanding it because the major stressor for us is decision making. trying to find the right thing. And it's an impossible exercise. And instead, just make it work for you.
Well, I really appreciate you going through it, and you do go through a lot more detail in the book. So obviously, we would encourage everyone to buy a copy of the book. We'll provide a link in the show notes. But it's something that is so relatable, right? It's something we deal with every day. I think the biggest challenge is when we decide not to decide, right? We've still made a decision, but
Yeah.
you had mentioned the word act, right? Taking action. That's the whole purpose of making the decision to move forward on something, right? One way or the other. But when we get stuck because we can't make the decision because we're concerned that, oh, if I do this,
Yeah, we think we
I'm
should
gonna
be
hold
able.
regret.
Sure, we think we should be able to make the decision. We
That's right.
find ourselves, unable to make it, so we do nothing. But as you said cleverly, that itself is a decision, and and all of this can be avoided. Now, when I say that stress, that making these decisions is the biggest, is the most stressful thing most of us experience. Added to that is the realization, from my perspective, for this I don't have data, but I believe stress is the biggest killer. That everybody these days will agree that stress is bad for your health. I think there's nothing worse. I was going to do this study right before COVID hit with people in China, where we were going to take hundreds of people who were just diagnosed with cancer, different kinds of cancer. And when, I think there are very few people, if any, that if they just get a diagnosis of having cancer, that they're not going to be stressed. So let them live with it for 3 weeks. And then if we measured their degree of stress over time, now let's say every 3-4 weeks, I believe that stress response would predict the course of the disease over and above nutrition, genetics, and treatment, which is a very big statement.
That's huge.
That's huge. And the important part of that is that we can control our stress. And the way we control our stress is in part just by becoming more mindful. And, even if you can't get yourself to see that terrible thing as potentially a good thing, if you're mindful, that's when you're happy. That's when you're feeling engaged. And so you're building up a reserve of health and good feelings, so that then if you take a day out and you want to suffer, okay, it's not going to be as bad as living half of your life that way.
So a question for you on the point of stress. Now, you mentioned that you don't have any data necessarily around
Well, I have a lot of
this.
data on stress. I don't
Okay.
have any data. The study wasn't conducted saying that, in fact, stress is across all disease is the number one killer.
Okay, so based on that statement, and I would concur based on what I've read, my own research, my own experiences, etc. But all of the data that you have collected, which didn't, this study didn't happen. But what is it specifically? Why do you make that statement? Because it's a bold statement, it's a big statement. But what do you think about when you make that statement?
Well, I make the statement because of what happens to the body. If we go back to mind-body unity,
Mm-hmm.
that when you're stressed, you're doing bad things to your body that accumulates over time and has to wear you down. Stress is mindless. So if nothing else, that when you're being stressed, the neurons aren't firing. You're in some sense either growing or dying. And when you're mindful, you're growing. And when you're mindless, the system is turning itself off.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you for that. So, Ellen, what are, you've done, you must be such an amazing person
Oh,
of
yes. You don't
curiosity,
know the half of it.
always asking great questions. I can't even imagine what your mornings must be like when you first get out of bed. I don't know. Do you keep a journal of ideas? Where does all this go if you're not exercising on everything that comes to your mind?
Now, in the middle of the night, I get an idea and I repeat it a few times and hope it'll be there in the morning. In the morning, I either remember it or I don't remember I had it, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. So if it matters, you'll hopefully do something with it. So, with that said, with curiosity and all these different ideas that you have, what are one or two bigger questions that you're asking yourself today? It could be about your own personal life, could be about your profession, something else that you're thinking about studying, but one or two really big, meaningful questions that you're contemplating.
Oh, gee. In some ways, sadly, Jay, it's the same old, same old. That I'm happy, I don't do stress, and I'm surrounded by people who are not so happy and are stressed. And so forever, I'm trying to find the way to turn all of that around. Um, I think research wise, there are things that I'm exploring. I'm trying to build the mindful hospital, the mindful school, and to show the ways mindfulness may be contagious. Um, and I think that one of the things that we might mention that I talk about in the book is I have a lot of respect for my colleagues, and my colleagues can often get you from here is bad to here is better. And what I spend time talking about, and this it answers some of the question you just asked me, I'm looking for better than better. And I think a lot of our limits are mindlessly incorporated and dictated by our language. So, for example, uh, hope. Seems like hope is a good thing, right? Certainly better than being hopeless. But when I go get coffee in the morning, I don't hope the coffee will be there. So coffee has hope, not coffee. I haven't had enough coffee. Hope has built into it an expectation for failure. Trying, you tell kids, try, you can do it. It's better than letting the child or your spouse or whatever give up. But have you ever tried to eat an ice cream cone? You just eat it. So again, the word trying has built into it failure. There's so many things in our language. One that was very big for me was years ago. I was asked to give a sermon in one of the Harvard churches. I'm Jewish and I'm not religious, but I say yes to everything, so I said yes. And then I'm trying to think, what can I talk about? Not knowing much about religion, I was going to be limited. I thought I could talk about forgiveness. So this is what I came up with. If you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? They're going to tell you it's good. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad? They're going to tell you it's bad. But you can't forgive unless you first blame. So our forgivers are our blamers. Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? Well, you blame people for bad things, but things in and of themselves are not good or bad, right? So what do we have here? We have people who see the world negatively, who blame, and then forgive. My view, hardly divine. All right, that there's a better than better way of doing all of this. Certainly, if you blame, I think you should forgive. But if you understand why the person did what they did from their perspective, that obviates the need for forgiveness. Behavior makes sense, or else the person wouldn't have done it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be rude, obnoxious, and aggressive. So when people are doing these things, why? Well, it turns out, and this is, I've done so many studies and so many life, extending research, but this is the most important to me. This one realization that behavior makes sense or else the person wouldn't have done it. Every single negative description of a behavior has an equally strong but positive alternative. So you might not like me because I'm gullible, which I am. I mean, I mark the edge of the continuum. I can try to change, I keep failing. And why is that? Because I value being trusting. You are very impulsive. You don't want to be impulsive, or I can't be friends with you as long as you're impulsive. You're going to continue to be impulsive because you value being spontaneous. You're also inconsistent, but that's because you value being flexible. So if you apply this to yourself, all of the things you don't like about yourself, you realize, well, wait a second, there's a very different way of understanding all of it. I'm not impulsive and gullible. I'm spontaneous and trusting. Right. And when I look at my friend Jay, and I apply the same rule to him, I don't want him to change. I don't want him to stop being inconsistent because I like the fact that he's flexible. So you can see how this changes your relationship to yourself, your relationship to other people. And what that also does then is if you have a better relationship, it's going to lead you to be more mindful because you feel safer to try new things, to entertain thoughts that may seem at first to be a little, I don't know, out of the box.
What a fascinating conversation. So, Ellen, I've got one more question for you as we're wrapping up our conversation, and then a big ask for you. So, number one, the question: what is, if you think back over your life, what is one of the toughest decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person who you've become? One of the toughest decisions.
You know, since I don't live my life that way, Jay, it's hard for me to come up with, with these decisions because whatever decision I end up making, I find the way that it was the right decision. But interesting, let me use a dear friend of mine who is trying to decide, should she retire? And she wants to retire, but she doesn't want to retire. And this is going on for years. Right now, her business, the building itself was owned by somebody else, and she felt she was too old to buy the building. Somebody bought the building, forcing her to retire, and she's, a happy clam. All right, that I can think of many, many instances of that sort where you're going, should I, shouldn't I, and then circumstances change. This is apropos of almost nothing except that we can't predict. So when many, many years ago, that husband who told me about the pancreas was in the army. And so I went to the commissary and I bought, we were leaving the army. He was leaving the army. So I bought all these stockings because the price, BJ's and these places didn't yet exist. So I got these at an incredible price, and I love a bargain, right? And I think it was about 3 weeks after I got home, pantyhose came out, which meant that this whole, all of these stockings were never going to be used, right? So I pay attention to all of those misguesses, so to speak, which makes me more and more certain not to stress over making the right decision.
I get it. I love that philosophy, and that's something I'm going to continue to work on myself as a result of not only our conversation, but reading your book. And I thank you for sharing all of your amazing insights. So here is my big ask. I would love it if you would give all of us, everyone that's watching and listening, including me, one challenge. What is something that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
I think let's use the last thing I was just talking about. Take that person who you care most about, who's driving you crazy, because they're so, whatever it is, and recontextualize it and see how it's actually positive. Next time you get frustrated, ask yourself how that's actually an advantage. Those are two separate things, but they go hand in hand.
All right. Very good. Excellent challenge. I'm going to take you up on that, and I know that our audience is going to as well. Dr. Ellen Langer, I want to thank you again so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. This has really been a phenomenal conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your immense amount of wisdom and sharing some great stories as well. I'm grateful for you, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jay. It was fun.
Absolutely. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take just a moment to leave us a review, subscribe, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests, just like Dr. Ellen Langer. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and my friends, until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure you run out to pick up a copy of The Mindful Body, and do yourself a favor, actually apply what you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.